Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back into the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today we're going to be diving into the second half of my top 20 wide receiver rankings. I posted my top 10 video yesterday, so go check that out. I'll leave that video in the cards and in the description of today's episode, but go check that one out if you haven't done so already. Today we'll be diving into numbers 11 through 20, so the second half and the bottom 20 of this list here for 2022 fantasy football. So, as always, if you're new around here, drop down, click that subscribe button, and turn the bell on so you're never late for an episode. Also, for those of you looking for a draft guide this season, check out sizzlefantasy.com. When you go and check out Underdog Fantasy, you can use promo code SFS, and that'll get you access to the 2022 draft guides absolutely free. When you deposit on Underdog, they're going to double your money as well, and you're going to have the opportunity to bet on the NBA Finals here for the duration of this summer, bet on props during next NFL season, and even enter into some best ball drafts and leagues with myself and other members of the SFS community this offseason. So again, the draft guides are on sizzlefantasy.com, but when you sign up for Underdog and use promo code SFS, you're going to get those draft guides, both redraft and dynasty, for free. Also, one more thing, keep an eye out for another video later on today. I'm going to be posting my top 24 dynasty wide receiver tiers. So stay tuned for that video. But without further ado, let's get into my number 11 wide receiver. All right, here we go. So for mid-June here, Keenan Allen is my wide receiver 11 for this upcoming season. Overall, Keenan is not somebody that's going to be a league-winning player. This is a guy who has an extremely safe floor and is really just a consistent force in fantasy lineups, but he's not going to be the difference for your team. Keenan Allen is not a draft choice that's going to take your team over the top per se, but this is definitely a player who I would be interested in drafting. Now, he's not my favorite person to take off the board at his current ADP, which is a 27.5 overall pick, so he's a very early third-round pick at times. I think there are other wide receivers with higher upside. At times you can get a T. Higgins, who I have ranked one spot ahead of him. He's my number 10 receiver, again, from yesterday's video. But I still do think that there's a lot of value to be had here for a guy who, again, isn't necessarily going to let you down frequently throughout the NFL season. This is a guy who is tied to Justin Herbert, obviously one of the best young QBs in the game. Right now he's going off the board as the QB3 for fantasy this season, and Herbert is a guy who I'm taking as my second quarterback. I've talked about this offseason, but I'd rather have Justin Herbert in fantasy this season than Patrick Mahomes. But that's besides the point for right now. The bottom line is I'm very confident in Herbert's abilities. And when Keenan Allen has 25% of the target share or more in this Los Angeles Chargers, not Las Vegas offense, when he has 25% or more of this Chargers target share the last 5 years straight, that is incredibly valuable. He's done that in back-to-back seasons here with Justin Herbert in his first two NFL seasons, and I think that he's got a lot to work with. Again, this is a steady, low-end wide receiver one. The ceiling is decent. He can, every once in a while, and once in a great while, really, he'll toss out a 2-touchdown game and, maybe go over 100 yards. Obviously, he's getting volume every week. He's also a guy who's had 5 straight 137 target or more seasons, but he's never had a double-digit touchdown season in his career. So touchdown production is not really the main slice of the production here. It's volume and reception totals, which makes him obviously a lot more valuable in PPR formats. The last thing I love about Keenan Allen here is his slot snap percentage in terms of the amount of times when he's on the football field that he lines up in the slot. When you get a route runner as lethal as Keenan Allen, a guy who's as savvy and as meticulous with his technique, guys in the slot of his ability are essentially uncoverable, and he was number 5 in slot snap percentage last year amongst NFL wide receivers at 52.6%. So over half of the time, Keenan Allen lines up in the slot, and when you can break in or out against a team's likely not top corner, slot corners are asked to do a lot more than boundary corners are in today's NFL, but when you've got a talent of this level for Keenan Allen, you're going to do some serious damage. So that's how he's able to get open so much, see so many targets, and have volume at an insane level every single season. A.J. Brown, for me, his ADP is a little ahead of Keenan Allen at 25 overall, but again, this is Underdog Best Ball ADP. Promo code SFS gets you the draft guides free on sizzlefantasy.com. A.J. Brown's my number 12 receiver, so my final wide receiver one in 12-team formats for this year. Now, AJB absolutely has a higher weekly ceiling in terms of the if he played his perfect game would have a higher output than Keenan Allen's perfect game would have. But his floor is also a lot lower than Keenan's. AJ is a guy who has relied on extreme levels of efficiency throughout his NFL career. And I think the situation this season with Philadelphia is not nearly as good as it could be. A lot of times I hope wide receivers get moved to find them find themselves in a better situation, and obviously Tennessee was not perfect, but he made it work again because this is a high level player and someone after the catch who is absolutely deadly. He's able to use his physique and his stature to impose his will on defensive backs and be highly effective in the pass game. But now that you move to Philadelphia, that actually was a more run-heavy team than Tennessee was last season and has arguably lesser QB play in terms of throwing the football downfield. There is one really interesting stat I did pull that is, on paper it seems like a big plus. So, there is reason to believe here that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe A.J. Brown can have a high-level wide receiver one season. So we'll get to that stat in a second here. But overall, at face value, I'm not so confident the situation is going to reap a ton of fantasy football success. Now, to speak to A.J. Brown's ability in 2020, his second season in the NFL, he was the wide receiver 6 in PPR for points per game. He played 14 games and again finished as a top 6 player in the points per game category. So he is very, very capable of getting it done. And he has never had a 100 reception season or, an elite level of target volume in his offense. He's had absolutely a nice target share in Tennessee, but this just hasn't been a team since he's been in the NFL that's passed at a high rate. There is that same concern as we move here to the Philadelphia Eagles, who are 29th in team pass plays per game last season, so bottom 3 in the NFL. Jalen Hurts last year, when we're talking about the QB play he's moving himself into, was 22nd in red zone attempts, so the Eagles are not throwing the ball at a high rate once they get in scoring territory. And this is a team that could potentially have more positive game scripts and have less of a need to throw the football late in contests this year. And Jalen Hurts was 30th in catchable pass rate last season, so bottom 2 if you take those top 32 and consider them all the top players in the league, the starters for NFL teams. So Hurts's passing categories are not great there. The one number I did see, though, that is very interesting to me, and I'm not so sure if this number is skewed because of a minimal amount of attempts. I'm not sure if he was legitimately just better in this category than I've been giving him credit for. I got to do more research to find context behind this stat, but Jalen Hurts was 10th in deep ball accuracy. Now, I do not consider Jalen Hurts to be a prolific passer. He had a 61.3% completion percentage. I know there's Jalen Hurts truthers out there or just hardcore Eagles fans. I'm sorry that I'm beating up on him. Look, I think your guy can finish as the number 1 overall QB in fantasy this season, but as a passer and as it pertains to his ability to deliver the utmost level of elite seasons for A.J. Brown, I'm not sure that's the context of the situation here in 2022, but I'm a huge A.J. Brown fan. I have been since he came out of Ole Miss, and I would love to see him have high levels of success. Diontae Johnson, his ADP is 40.8. I think we're getting a bit of a discount on him here. I would love to draft him at that spot on the board. He's got back-to-back 140 target seasons, so you want to talk about volume monsters. Keenan Allen, Diontae Johnson, 2 prolific players in terms of seeing an insane rate of footballs head their direction. Diontae Johnson is basically at the top of the list for every category in terms of receiving volume. He had a 98.2% route percentage, which was the second highest marker in the NFL. He had a 91% snap share. So, 9 times out of 10, Diontae Johnson is on the field. And again, 98.2 times out of 100, he's running a route on those snaps that he's on the football field. So you're getting ridiculously high numbers in those 2 categories. He was number 1 in routes run last year, so nobody ran more passing routes than Diontae Johnson did. And he had a 28.5% target share of a Steelers offense that included some other pretty decent targets between Chase Claypool, although he was banged up. Juju did miss a ton of time last year, but Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth were there as well. So Diontae likely sees some regression in his overall volume this season. There is the major question mark and concern of who will Kenny Pickett truly love, and will he lock on to one player as heavily as Ben Roethlisberger locked on to Diontae Johnson? Now, I've got the, one side of my brain telling me, hey, there's a risk here with the situation. You could have Mitchell Trubisky for 4 weeks and then blow all the chemistry up and switch to Kenny Pickett in week 5. And then there's the other side of my brain where it's like, well, what if Kenny Pickett starts day 1 and they never look back, which if you start your rookie quarterback, you probably shouldn't turn the other direction because that'll just trash his confidence. And then that side of my brain's like, well, if Kenny Pickett starts, the NFL told you this year he's the quarterback 1 in this draft. He was the first QB taken by multiple rounds. And then you've got a situation where You think about Ben Roethlisberger and how inefficient and how bad he was playing down the stretch of his NFL career. I mean, he was out of shape. His arm was shot. He was very ineffective pushing the ball downfield. As a result, Diontae Johnson's efficiency was very poor, which makes him seem like a worse player than he was, and it just makes him seem like a guy who was a target magnet, which is very true, but a lot of these passes were at or just beyond the line of scrimmage. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, I truly believe in Diontae Johnson. I think he's one of the best wide receivers in the league. And you get me a quarterback who might be more competent getting him the football distributed downfield. I was also very interested to see that Diontae Johnson was 13th in deep targets with 24 of them last year. And then once I read that stat, I had this like flashback memory to Ben Roethlisberger just throwing the ball over his head over and over again. So, I mean, that was literally the case, whether it was Chase Claypool or Diontae Johnson, guys stretching the field, he would just shot put the ball 25, 30 yards downfield, and then it would just be a matter of could the receiver catch up to it and moss the corner. So I think that there's an opportunity to see a higher quality passing rate this year, the situation being, more opportunistic and catchable balls 10 plus yards downfield. And I think that, yes, he probably will see some regression in the targets category, but if his efficiency is able to climb, I think there is still a lot to like here. So again, at the 40.8 overall pick on Underdog basketball formats, I will be taking Diontae Johnson at that draft spot. I like him a lot. And I think that, yes, his upside, again, isn't as high as some other players in this list, but I think he's a great fantasy option nonetheless. Michael Pittman is my number 14 receiver for this year. His ADP is about 10 spots higher at the 30.6 pick here. If you're playing best ball, I would probably, more often than not, take Pittman ahead of Diontae Johnson. If we're talking strictly season-long redraft leagues, which is really the purpose of today's rankings, but again, the ADP is provided by Underdog Best Ball Formats because, of course, code SFS gets you the draft guides for redraft and Dynasty free this season. But Pittman is a guy who definitely has a higher ceiling and higher upside, although I would argue his weekly floor is a bit lower. Yes, Michael Pittman had really good volume last year. He had multiple double-digit target games. He had 129 targets on the year. However, what I found to be very interesting is that with Carson Wentz, a guy who I, generalize and categorize as a guy who is kind of an aired-out gunslinger and likes to, loft the football up downfield, Pittman was just 29th in air yards. So the distance the ball travels from the quarterback's arm to the receiver's hands throughout the course of a season, essentially, it's kind of a metric to shine light on how deep the targets you are getting, or how, again, it's simply just the distance. Instead of north and south yardage, it takes into account the diagonal distance that the ball might travel as well. In terms of that, I was surprised because I thought that a guy who is the number one receiver in a Carson Wentz-led offense, I thought he would, at least rank in the top 20 in air yards, but he was 29th. So that was very interesting to me. You've also got a player who had, almost 1,100 yards, but only 6 touchdowns. A guy of Michael Pittman's frame, his leaping ability, his wingspan. You would expect him to catch more long vertical touchdown catches, be a more significant weapon in the red zone. But then you also take into account that Jonathan Taylor had 92 red zone rushing attempts last year. So this is a team that wants to run the ball in the red zone. The one issue I have with Pittman is I expect that to be the same, because I'm going to reference a stat here with Matt Ryan in some inefficiencies and struggles in the red zone that I think we have to take into account. But the moral of the story is we're going to get to some deep ball ratings for Matt Ryan here. And it's going to shed light on a lot of opportunities for Pittman to be prolific downfield this season, and maybe not even have to be so much of a threat and a force in the red zone to be able to put up better touchdown numbers than he saw a season ago. So the last thing I wanted to touch on from the 2020 year is that Pittman was 55th in target accuracy rating from Carson Wentz a season ago, so not fantastic numbers there. However, let's move on to Matty Ice. It's 2022. It's a new year. It's a new situation. We love to see that in fantasy football. It shakes things up, keeps things interesting. Matty Ice was 8th in accuracy rating a season ago, which is very, very good. If you can tell me you're getting a quarterback who's top 10 in accuracy rating, I love to see that. And even better, to add sweetener, for a fast, athletic, tall, lanky receiver like Michael Pittman, who has a lot of opportunity to go up and again win those jump balls and have a really great catch rating. There's a lot of potential for Pittman here as a player. Matty Ice was 2nd in deep target accuracy, baby. Behind who? Joe Burrow. So that is a very impressive stat, and I actually remember watching some clips of Falcons games with Matt Ryan having really nice touch on balls down the sideline. There was a few passes against the Saints, one to C-Pat down the right sideline. It was a beautiful pass, and you see stuff like that to Kyle Pitts last year as well. So number 2 in deep accuracy is a big thing for me. I think that's going to provide a lot of opportunity for Pittman. Matt Ryan was 31st in red zone accuracy, however. That's how you get struggles with guys like Kyle Pitts having 1 receiving touchdown last year. You're not getting great accuracy in the red zone, but that's why you have Jonathan Taylor. You know he's going to plug away there, and if you can just get balls vertically to Pittman, he has the talent to get the job done and do the rest. He's also number 3 in terms of his accuracy under pressure. Joe Burrow, again, number 1 in that category. So I think that you've got a lot to like here, and Matty Ice should not be under pressure nearly as many times as he was as a Falcon, because that offensive line is hot garbage, and the Colts offensive line is thought of as top 5. Their tackles aren't nearly as good as what they were pre-Costanzo's retirement and whatnot, but the interior of that line is still pretty great. And then he also had a 73.9% deep ball catchable pass rate, which means about 3/4 of the time you're getting a catchable pass from Matt Ryan. That's how you get that number 2 in deep accuracy stat. And I think all these things are just great, adding fuel to the fire here for a guy in Michael Pittman who I haven't always been the biggest proponent of, but I'm starting to kind of see why he might finally, he had Phil Rivers at the end of his shelf life, and a Carson Wentz struggling to find his identity as a quarterback. He kind of lost himself after that ACL injury. It's quite sad. But hopefully, the Commanders are probably not the place to reboot your career successfully, but let's root for Carson this season. Amari Cooper is the player at number 15 here. I'll be honest, tomorrow he could shoot down my rankings into the 20s. It's all proponent on Deshaun Watson. I hate that I have to keep talking about this. It's unfortunate that Deshaun did the things that he did, and obviously he should see disciplinary action, and if that's the case, you're going to see Amari Cooper tank down this list. But his fantasy value is tied to Deshaun Watson. That's just the reality of the situation. It sucks, but it is what it is. Amari Cooper is someone that I did not have ranked very highly when Baker Mayfield was the starting quarterback for the Browns, or expected to be that for the week or so that he was in Cleveland with Baker before they made that move for Deshaun. So basically what it comes down to here is that Cooper's ADP is suffering because of the tie to Deshaun Watson, where it should be prospering, have Deshaun not have any off-the-field issues. If you look at Deshaun Watson's top receiver on the Houston Texans in his 3 most full seasons, Will Fuller was number 8 in points per game. D-Hop was number 1 in points per game in 2018, and he was number 5 in 2019. And then he was wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 3 in points per game the 2 years prior to that. So you're getting elite level production for the number 1 receiver in Deshaun Watson's offense. And actually, I'm literally, yesterday we got distracted by my Instagram reel going crazy. Today I'm distracted by Deshaun Watson speaking to the media on ESPN, just tweeted out by Adam Schefter. So I've got my phone on a little stand so I can see if something happens live while we're recording here. That's what's going on right now. So basically, we'll see what happens here. I would expect there has to be some disciplinary action. I've heard some conversation about, he sat out the whole last year. That should be enough time served. But that was not the NFL's choice. Yes, he was, I think, technically on the commissioner's, reserve list or whatever. But I felt that was always more about Deshaun not wanting to play football for the Texans, more so than it was about him removing himself from the situation because of legal issues. So Cooper is in a spot where this is the first chance he's had, as a former top first-round pick in the NFL draft, not just a fantasy draft, a former top-level first-round pick. It's the first chance he's had since 2018 with Dallas to be the clear-cut top option in a passing offense, and that's a big deal, but things could very easily not go as expected. Jaylen Waddle's at number 16 here again. These rankings at the end of the day are going to change so much, and I'm expecting the worst. I'm being pessimistic here with Amari Cooper, and I'm kind of shocked that I kept him at 15 for this video, but I truly think he will have a great season if Watson's the quarterback. So until we have other information, that's where he's going to stay. But Jaylen Waddle here is a guy who his ADP is 35.3 overall. So again, much higher than a guy who a lot of people have concerns with and are staying away from, an Amari Cooper. But For me, Jaylen Waddle suffers from Tyreek Hill. And I love Tyreek Hill. He was in our top 10 video yesterday. If you want to see my analysis on his role in that situation, go check that out. But I just don't see any way that either of these two players can really, bang their head on the goalpost in terms of smashing on their upside. I think that there's going to be some sort of a happy medium between each of these players' ceiling and floor, and they're both going to kind of settle in between at that level. I had the epiphany in one video that, if the Dolphins want to just line up 4 wide, and have twin sets on each side of the formation every single play and put Waddle and Tyreek Hill in the slot and, just alternate whipping passes out and getting them out in space, that could be effective. But, at a point they're going to need to have a run game. At a point they're going to need to keep guys in the box and, shake things up and looks up for the defense. They're not going to want to have 4 receivers on the field at all times. And that's not to say that these guys can't run routes from the perimeter because they're very complete and prolific players. But it comes down to the Tua thing for me. You think about Mike McDaniel, his ties and relationships with San Francisco 49ers organization, and everyone's first instinct is to compare Tyreek to Debo. He's going to be the Debo role for this year. And I think the role we saw from Jaylen Waddle, he is nowhere near. Neither of these players are anything close to the level of physical player that Debo Samuel is. These are more electric guys in space, players who are going to be incredibly shifty, and you really don't want them taking big shots, and you're not going to line them up in the backfield and give them carries up the gut on inside zone plays or halfback power. That's not the role for these players. Debo Samuel is a guy who, he said it himself, if he was used in that wide back role from week 1, he probably would have had 2,000 scrimmage yards and 1,000 of each rushing and receiving yardage total. So that's not how I think they're going to use them in Miami. And again, it comes down to Tua. Tua has a nice deep ball accuracy rating, but he also did not attempt a super high volume of deep passes last year. That is a strength for both of these players. And when they had Jaylen Waddle, they gave him nearly 25% of the target share, 142 total targets. For context there, he had a 26.2% target rate when he was on the field, and an 84.2% snap share. 43.8% of those were lined up in the slot. All beautiful numbers. But everything changes now, is the red flag, the question mark. And who gets what role is really my question, because I could see, a mistake happening here where one of these players is pigeonholed into the field stretching position and one of the players gets the underneath work. Whatever player gets more underneath work and more PPR volume, to me, is going to have the better fantasy season because, again, I'm not super confident in Tua's ability to consistently deliver deep passes. Now, the one thing that kind of moves the needle here is that you have to respect the other player. So if you're getting single coverage and less safety attention over the top, then I think that these two players succeed vertically. But if Tua has to fit the ball in a tight window and make a laser pass, with a split second to put the ball in a tight crease, I'm not very confident in him to do that. But again, we'll see what happens. Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill are 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL, and the Dolphins have both of them. So Mike McDaniel, I think, is a smart guy. I believe in him. He's a funny dude, so I want him to succeed. And it all come down to how creative he can get and how he can make these players coexist, because he's got 2 great offensive weapons, 2 potential, top 10 receivers of the generation, if you will. They are that talented. Jaylen Waddle has miles of work to do to get to that point in terms of production and, credibility, but the talent, the explosiveness, that the player is there. They just have to figure out how to maximize that potential. DJ Moore is the 17th player for me today. His ADP is 37.0 overall. Now, before everyone goes crazy, because I feel that the last 2 seasons I've been critically low on DJ Moore, and I feel that I've been proven right, at least last season. This year could be a different story, but the track record and the concerns I had last season were brought to fruition. So why would I not continue to have those concerns going forward? Heading into last year, DJ Moore's career high in touchdown receptions in a season was 4. DJ Moore's career high in touchdown receptions is still 4. Exactly how many he had last season, which is also how many he had the season prior to that. He's had 3 straight 4 TD seasons, and his rookie year he had 2. So through 4 NFL seasons, this is a player who has a grand total of 14 receiving touchdowns. I'm not going to argue with you that DJ Moore is a fantastic and potentially prolific wide receiver. This is a guy who has a lot of talent. He was a high first-round pick for a reason. when we talk about his ability to, be number 10, not number 1, 10, still very impressive, in overall route wins last year, it's clear that he's separating and beating his coverage. The situation has never changed, though. This is a guy who has had bad passing quarterback play every year of his NFL career. Sam Darnold last year started out and gave DJ Moore about a 4-week stretch of what looked to be wide receiver 1 potential. I mean, he was a bona fide top 12 option for the first month of last season. But then Sam fell off a cliff. And whether it was the injury, whether it was a lack of confidence, whatever the situation was, it completely blew up and combusted in our faces. And despite that hot start, he still had 162 targets. The football was heading his direction week in, week out. He was the clear number 1 option. The volume is elite. If you talk about him playing in a 17-game season, 162 targets is phenomenal. And you're talking about almost double-digit looks per game, nearly. If it was the former 16-game season, it would have been just over 10 targets per game. But again, we added a game last season. Despite those 162 targets, ridiculous volume. One of the best players in the league in that metric. He was wide receiver 23 in points per game after the hot start he had to start last year. So the difference on paper is simple. Score more touchdowns, you're going to soar up those rankings very fast. Because the margin of error at the wide receiver position, there are so many great players and productive options in today's game that small number of 4, even getting to 8, which is still a decent number. It's a number where guys like Keenan Allen and Diontae Johnson have hovered around the last couple of seasons here. If he can do that, he's a fringe wide receiver 1 easily. But the QB play has not put him in a position to do so. He was number 1 in drops last year. I'm just throwing that out there for those of you that care. I personally don't really, give a rip about that. Justin Jefferson, I believe, was tied with him with 11 drops, ranked number 1. Whatever. Jefferson was number 4 in points per game a season ago. So, if you're going to freak out about the drops, everyone, lost their mind over Jamar Chase's drops last season. That's fine. The looks, the opportunities are there. The other thing is he had a 28.4% target share. So that just goes along with the volume. But he was 86th in target accuracy and 81st in catch rate. So, the conversion of targets to receptions, which therefore equals production, is god-awful, and that needs to change. And until that changes, which namely should happen and occur if the quarterback situation changes, then I will start to rise him up my rankings and respect him as the talent that he is, because I know it's there. I watch the routes. He's frying dudes, absolutely cooking them. But when he has to stretch out and dive and get in the dirt and lose all of his momentum when he's trying to catch a pass, then it becomes a big problem for me. Jerry Jeudy's my number 18 wide receiver this season. 50-50 shot here. I'm probably taking Jeudy half the time over DJ Moore in best ball. Again, just because I have a lack of faith in this situation, whereas I have an extreme level of confidence in Jerry Jeudy. And it's really the Russell Wilson effect. We've talked about it all offseason long. He will be more efficient with Russell Wilson. He will have more ceiling in this offense with Russell Wilson's ability to produce downfield passing attempts, quality ones at that. And he will also be someone that I believe that we'll see more volume, because last season he only played 10 games, 38 receptions in those 10 games, so pretty bad. 3.8 receptions per game is pretty modest. But when you're talking about transitioning from Teddy B and Drew Lock to Russell Wilson, I mean, that's as big as if, I would argue that gap is about as big if the Carolina Panthers were able to go from Sam Darnold to Jimmy G, who is nowhere near the level of Russell Wilson, but the poor play. Maybe it'd be more fair to make that comparison between Teddy to Russ than it would from, Sam to Jimmy G, because I think Drew Lock to Russ would be a much wider gap. But even if, for the sake of argument, if the Panthers were to bring in Jimmy G, I think it would make the situation 10 times better for DJ Moore. Besides the point, we're talking Jerry Jeudy here. So basically, everything that you like about a situation just got elevated and got better. I think they're going to be insanely balanced, insanely efficient. Their points per game as an offense is going to dramatically rise. And Jerry Jeudy, I think, has the opportunity to be the primary beneficiary. I think he's going to be the number 1 target in this offense in terms of he will see the most footballs come his direction. Now, yeah, sure, maybe Cortland Sutton will out-target him in the red zone, but Jerry Jeudy is one of the best route runners in the NFL. I think that his tape speaks for itself. He was number 1 in target separation last year, despite the small sample size. I still think that's impressive. Maybe he won't be number 1 in target separation when he runs twice as many routes this season. But you're talking about a league where every inch and every yard matters. And if Jerry Jeudy has the most cushion between himself and the defender when the football hits his hands, that's something that, I'm going to take into serious account. Terry McLaurin at number 19 here for... that still says the abbreviation for Washington Football Team. And the team is now the Washington Commanders. So I apologize. I have to change that. But Terry McLaurin's ADP is 44.7 overall. Look, I think his ceiling gets a little bit better with Carson Wentz. Yes, we just talked through Michael Pittman. And the concerns, the issues that we see Pittman's no longer dealing with in that situation, transitioning from Wentz to Matt Ryan. But in the same token, you're going from Taylor Heineke, who is not much of a deep ball passer, to a Carson Wentz, who I think has a lot more ability to make downfield. Just like DJ Moore, Terry McLaurin is one of the most talented and overlooked wide receivers in the NFL. He's one of the guys who is a fantasy football sweetheart, just like DJ Moore is. We're all rooting for them. We all want them to do so well because they're so effing talented, but they just don't hit on their ceiling as frequently as we want them to, because the QB play is not where it needs to be at. So he's in a contract dispute right now, not reporting to OTAs or practice, which is somewhat of a red flag, but hopefully they get a deal done. If not, I'll gladly take a trade to a better quarterback situation. But as we saw with A.J. Brown, it doesn't always work out perfectly. And, just some optimistic statistics to throw out here for Terry McLaurin. He was number 4 in air yards last season, which resulted in him being number 5 in unrealized air yards. That being, like we talked about, air yards being the distance between the quarterback's arm and the receiver when it hits their hands. Unrealized air yards are those plays that didn't come to fruition, the opportunities that were missed, whether it's an inaccurate pass. Yes, it could also be a drop. Whatever the case may be, there was a lot of food, a lot of meat left on the bone here for Terry McLaurin in 2021 that Heineke and company, because he was not the only quarterback to start for Washington last year, they were not able to capitalize on and realize. And he was also 79th in target accuracy. So there is miles of improvement to be made here. Now, technically, Michael Pittman, I'm looking at my sheet here, was only 55th in target accuracy, but I'll take 55th over 79th any day of the week. You're still moving up 24% on that leaderboard, 24 spots on that leaderboard. So yes, it's still not a perfect situation, but Terry has seen positive moves in the right direction. Cut the tape on. This is, again, one of the most elite route runners in the league with 6'3" and elite athleticism. I can't believe he fell to the 3rd round in the draft, because being an Ohio State receiver, that he had to bring a certain level of physicality to the table. And then number 10 here, the final player we're going to talk about in today's episode. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. Smash the like button if you have found today's episode useful and enjoyed the content here at SFS. As always, click that subscribe button. We're trying to grow the community here. I want to help out as many of you guys as possible this season. If you got questions, comments, concerns, drop those down below, of course. And check out SFS Weekly. You can get a free piece of exclusive content every single week from me if you sign up. All I need is your email. And at max, you'll get 2 emails a week. And every time you get an email, it's going to come with an exclusive article with some piece of information. I'm never just going to, throw promotional stuff at you by itself. So last week, we talked through my top 10 secrets to dominate your 2022 leagues. This week, we're going to be covering my top stacks between quarterbacks and wide receivers. Fits today's video. So again, we're going to be looking at ADP, breaking down what the most advantageous wide receiver quarterback duos will be for this season. Why, of course, and then, what rounds to take these players in and such. So go check out SFS Weekly. Again, that's a free article you'll get when you sign up and subscribe to that. Again, it's free. All you need is an email address. And when you sign up, you can go back and look at previous logged videos. So if you want to go check out that top 10 secrets article, that one will be accessible to you once you sign up. So, once per week, you're talking in a year, 52 exclusive articles filled with fantasy information. I would take that. It sounds like a pretty interesting thing for me, at least. Mike Williams here is really behind ADP, but again, this is for Underdog Best Ball, which prioritizes ceiling and upside. 28.7 overall is his current draft pick on Underdog Fantasy. Remember, promo code SFS gets you the draft guides for free, and SFS Gold, which comes with our weekly lineup advice and in-season advice all year long. Mike Williams is clearly one of the highest ceiling wide receivers in the NFL. We talked through Justin Herbert, why we love him so much, way back at number 11 with Keenan Allen in today's video. But for Mike Williams, really what it boils down to is inconsistency. The reason he's down here so far is because you could start him and legitimately get 0 points. Like, that is not out of the question. He could have a goose egg and be a no-show for a contest, but then he can also come out and score like 40 fantasy points, which we saw him do like a lot last year. In terms of a lot, not meaning like 10 out of 17 games or 50% of the time, but a lot as compared to what the normal going rate for a guy who's scoring 30 plus to 40 fantasy points in full PPR formats can do. So the reason his upside and his value in best ball is so freaking high is because if he lays one of those goose egg games, the computer will put someone else into your best ball lineup, and it's no harm, no foul. So basically, he's the perfect best ball player, if you really think about it that way. As long as you have another option who's steady enough to come in those down weeks, Mike Dubb will win you plenty of games. So what it comes down to at the end of the day is, again, that inconsistency for season-long formats. It can be a little bit more killer. You probably want to go wide receiver heavy or have a multitude of options so that, you could have either Mike as your flex or someone really competent as your flex because, again, if he gives you a really low point production, you're going to need some staples at other places in your lineup. He did have 129 targets, though, 28.8% of the target share in LA's offense. Very, 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 very valuable to have when you're tied to Justin Herbert. But he's in a great offense. He's in a great situation. He's a big-time playmaker, wins vertically, and is like a 75-25 jump ball player. I should go and pull his contested catch win rate last year. But when they lob that ball up there, I'm very confident that he'll come down with it if he puts himself in a good box-out position. So those are my top 20 fantasy football wide receivers. Again, if you have not checked out episode 1 with my top 10, go do so. That'll be in the cards. And I'll try to remember to put it in the description of today's episode. Again, SFS Weekly, free weekly exclusive content. SFS Gold gets you the lineups, the draft guides. And you can get those draft guides for free for the calendar year if you sign up for Underdog Fantasy before the end of the month of June. Promo code SFS, again, unlocks the redraft and dynasty guides as well as in-season lineup advice just for $10 deposited on Underdog. So go check that stuff out. If you don't want to sign up for Underdog, you can get the draft guides for just $5. Not much you can get for $5 these days, so go check that out. Again, sizzlefantasy.com. It's on the screen, and we've got a ton of content coming out daily. We're putting more, at least 5 player profiles in per day. SFS Weekly will have the full breakdown of exactly what all was added to the draft guide every single week, but sleepers, busts, must-own players, rounds 1 through 20 in redraft are all live. We've got our positional rankings, our big board rankings for redraft, our top 250 players, our top 250 for dynasty positional rankings, all 60 top rookie players for this year, along with completed profiles for all those top 60 options. So check all that stuff out, you guys. Bust my butt on that stuff and try to get you guys the best content out there. So I appreciate you guys just taking the time to take a look at that stuff and all that. So thank you guys so much for watching. Drop a like if you enjoyed today's video. Comment any questions. I'm here to be a resource and a tool for you. And I will see you guys either tonight or tomorrow. Peace out.